Hi, I'm Carol Cottrell, and I had the honor of serving as mayor of the city of Saginaw from 2005 until 2007. In the year of 2007, Saginaw had the opportunity to celebrate its sesquicentennial, or 150th birthday. As a part of the celebration, we went back and interviewed former mayors who were still available to us to talk about what it was like to sit in the center chair at City Council and to give us their perspective on the events that took place and helped shape Saginaw to become the city it is today. We hope you enjoy the interviews, and thank you for being a part of Saginaw's history, its rich heritage, and its promising future. Okay, well, the reason I decided to run in 1995 wasn't so much that I had a particular issue that energized me as much as I saw council, some members in particular, being pretty disrespectful of other members and bringing that to the table and displaying that disrespect very routinely and very regularly, and that dismayed me. I also had lived in the community for a period of time at that point and felt like I wanted to give something back to the community. And certainly service on city council is one of those ways to give back. So it was a combination of those things, feeling like we the citizens deserve people who are more respectful, not only of the citizens but of each other sitting at the council table, and a sense of wanting to give back to the community. So it was in that climate that I ran in 1995. I had no political experience up to that point in time. I had served on the City of Saginaw's Recreation Advisory Board, but I certainly had never run for political office before. The closest I had come was running for class officer back in high school. Was at a local establishment with a group of friends. Actually, it was owned by a family member, and the establishment was someplace else. That was the name of the establishment, over on Michigan, and was there with a group of friends, and there had been 5 seats open for election that year, and sat watching very nervously because had no sense. There was one council member who had declared they were not returning, so felt that there was at least one position that was going to be open, but had no sense of what my opportunity was. I certainly had received a lot of support from citizens as I went door to door, but it was very anxiety provoking watching the election results come in on the TV monitors as they were reported over our local government access channel. And then when the final results were tallied and they showed up on the television screen, there they were, and it was kind of like, it's real, oh my goodness, do I know what I've gotten myself into. And I remember my husband and a very dear friend of mine sitting across the table from each other, literally going nose to nose, because he was concerned that I was the only new person on council, and so was I walking into more of what we had hopefully been looking to change, and that was some of that civility or lack of civility. And she was more in, oh, it's her night, let her shine, you know, let her celebrate, and the two of them were kind of arguing back and forth, and I remember thinking to myself, I think this is supposed to be a celebration, but one of my closest friends and my husband are having this very loud and animated discussion, and it's not a pleasant one, and gosh, does this just give me a sense of what life on council is going to be like, that the people I care about the most are going to have heated discussions around me, or am I going to be a part of heated discussion? And obviously all of that happened over the next 12 years. I was not the top vote getter, I can tell you that. I was either 4th or 5th. I mean, I was not the top vote getter. At one point in time, I had been as high as 3rd in the vote getting. But I was just happy to get on the council. It was very interesting. I had met a number of the council people that I didn't know on the campaign trail, and so they were very cordial and very welcoming. There were other council members who, because I was the new kid, and literally I was the kid on council at that point in time, were somewhat suspicious, and while they weren't cold, they were certainly somewhat reserved with me till they got a chance to know me. One council person had actually grown up with my husband, and my husband had a very different personality type than I did. And so I believe this one council member assumed that I would be very much like my husband. And it took a while for this council person to discover we were indeed totally different people. And as my mother used to say, my husband could be very earthy in his language, and I like to think I was a little more refined. But we certainly had some very interesting discussions at our home. But the council members as a whole were very cordial to me. Well, there were a couple of challenges. When I ran for council and when I was first elected, council was meeting every Monday night, whereas currently in the year 2007, they now are meeting every other Monday night. And one of the issues that was swirling around council was the city attorney was proposing that council members take an oath of secrecy. Under the council prior to my being elected, council would go into closed session to discuss whether it was contract negotiations or purchasing of property or lawsuits, and they would come out of closed session, they would conclude their meeting, and the next morning they would be seeing in the local daily newspaper the results of their conversations behind closed doors. So somebody was obviously violating the closed sessions and putting the city's position at risk by sharing that information. So the city attorney was pushing for all council members to take an oath of secrecy. And so it led to a lot of tension between council and the attorney and management. And shortly after I came to council, I kind of sat back and listened to this and had sat down and reviewed what exactly is the Open Meetings Act and what does it allow. And quite frankly, it did allow for you to declare why you're going into closed session. You could say, we're going into closed session to discuss pending litigation. You didn't name the case, but you could say pending litigation or contract negotiations. So I just made the motion, why don't we just declare why we're going into closed session? That'll remove a lot of that curiosity and suspicion amongst the voters. And that was approved by the council pretty overwhelmingly. And it did. That made that whole controversy and that whole adversarial relationship between the management, the attorney, and council kind of dissipate. That was my first motion that I made, and I felt really good about that. There still were a lot of issues. There was a lot of tension within the community at that point in time. We still hear about it sometimes, but certainly the river being a dividing force in this community played very prominently in a lot of discussion at the council table at that point in time. To the extent that people don't quickly point to the river as being a dividing force in this community. And I think a lot of that goes to the fact that we're seeing a lot of development on the east side. When you look at the Washington corridor with MCVI buildings 1, 2, and 3, with MMR's headquarters, with the new 7-Eleven, with the farmers market being on Washington, with a lot of the old Victorian homes that had been turned into rooming houses, for lack of a better term, on Washington that really had become blighted and now they're torn down. The image of the east side of Saginaw has certainly, within that riverfront corridor, started to improve. And so it's not a readily, I guess the term I would look for is it's not as quickly pointed to as, see, all bad things are on one side of the river or the other. And we've seen a greater blending of the community in terms of when my husband was growing up in Saginaw, the east side of Saginaw was divided more along economic lines than opposed to racial lines. And we've seen it kind of go through that transformation in terms of the argument. Oh, well, now the east side is this or the west side is this. And again, I think we see the blending of those lines, the dissipating of those lines, because there's no obvious on east and west side in terms of disparities or differences. But it takes time for those things to go away. So certainly that argument exists for some people, but not nearly to the extent that it did. Oh my goodness, what would I do differently? Probably the thing that I, there are a couple of things, but they all revolve around one particular issue. And the issue was the firing of Deborah Kimball as our city manager. And if I could do something differently, after the firing of Deborah Kimball, there was a real outpouring of anger, and quite frankly, justifiably so. Anger from the community because council had gone into closed session that night in August and given Ms. Kimball a positive evaluation. Coming out of the evaluation that evening, the chair of the evaluation committee reported the scores, which were good scores on a scale of 1 to 5. She had a 3. It was over a 3.5 score. I don't remember the exact number. It wasn't. It was between 3.5 and 4 point. Anyway, reported the score and just let everything lie. Then just said that's the report. And so another council person, in an effort to move the meeting along, because we were at midnight now, and so it had been a rather lengthy meeting. Another council person said, well, I make a motion to extend the contract for a year. There were two attorneys, council's attorney and the city attorney, sitting in council chambers. Neither one of them caught it, nor did any of the council members, nor did Ms. Kimball catch. Her contract was an open-ended contract. It didn't require us to do an extension or to extend that contract for another year. So in response to your question, in hindsight, what I would have said is, wait a minute, I don't think that's an appropriate question for us to be dealing with. Could I get an opinion from the attorney? I would have done something to slow that process down, because quite frankly, after the vote was taken, the first time the vote was taken, I only heard 2 no votes, and then a roll call vote was called for. And at the roll call vote, now there were 5 people voting not to extend that contract. I think it surprised even the people who voted no. I truly believe it was late, everybody was tired, and if somebody had stepped up and said, wait just a minute, let's stop and think about this for a minute, we might have been able to stop that process. But we didn't. And so moving forward, now we're into a whole new process, and we ended up promoting the person who had been Ms. Kimball's deputy to the interim manager position, and ultimately giving that position to the person who had been her deputy. And quite frankly, that was done because we felt that staff and the community couldn't deal with, we needed to get back to even keel as soon as possible. They just didn't have the tolerance for going through another city manager selection process. In hindsight, that's the other part of that equation that I would have done differently. I would have done a nationwide city manager search at that point in time. But ultimately, we ended up with a manager and a good management team in Mr. Early and the current finance director that we have in Dale Stanton, and we managed to get a lot of really good things done. So it's just unfortunate that we had to go through that tumultuous time. Oh gosh, there were some terrific things. I think probably the moment that stands out for me above all others, bar none, is the night in May of 2006 where we had put forward a public safety millage in front of the voters, and we were asking them for 6 mills, to approve 6 mills for the purpose of funding police and fire services. If we had not gotten those 6 mills, we would have made drastic cuts within the police and fire departments, cuts that I don't know this community ever could have rebounded from. But we worked very hard at taking that message to the voters about exactly how much it would cost. And we made them a promise, and we said, we will not subtract any of our current funding in the general fund if you approve this millage. We will maintain our current level of funding from the general fund for public safety, and the 6 mills will be on top of it. Give us the 6 mills for 5 years. And over the course of those 5 years, we will also do efficiency studies. We will try to make this department as lean as we possibly can. I should say these departments, both police and fire. We will do everything we can to streamline operations without compromising public safety. And that was the first positive vote that had been cast for the city of Saginaw since 1979, when the tax cap was put in place. Not that I'm calling the tax cap a positive vote, but it was the first yes vote in the city of Saginaw since the late 70s. And the euphoria in the Union Hall that night when those election results came out, because we didn't win by a narrow margin. I mean, we won resoundingly and in every precinct in this city. And I could live to be 100, and I will never, ever witness the euphoria that was in that Union Hall that night, because even though that was a vote for public safety, it was almost a validation for the work that had been going on, that we were trying to do to get the ship of Saginaw headed in the right direction and to get us back on the correct track. And even employees who weren't part of either fire or police felt like it was a validation of their work as well. I envision that it will be a much different community than what it is in the year 2007. What I envision seeing 15 years from now, council, when I was the mayor, we took a directed approach with our block grants that we directed towards blight elimination. And we, rather than doing a scatter approach, taking down blighted, abandoned buildings, we focused on one neighborhood. And pretty much we have now taken out all the blighted buildings that we are able to take down in the Cathedral District, and council is now getting ready to move to the Houghton Jones neighborhood. So there will be, number one, a lot fewer blighted and abandoned buildings than there are in the community. Ultimately, that means there are much greater spaces for neighbors to purchase side lots and expand their yards. So the residential imprint of this community is going to look a little bit different. The riverfront area, which is from Washington to Michigan, we adopted a riverfront master plan in the year 2000. And just since 2000, we have seen, as I mentioned earlier, the buildings of Michigan Cardiovascular Institute, building number 1, plus buildings 2 and 3. The ambulance company, MMR, has located its headquarters, built a beautiful building on Washington. The entrance to St. Mary's Hospital has drastically changed. Farmers Market is on Washington. There's a new funeral home going up now. The Temple Theater has been totally renovated by a private family. And now we're starting some on the west side. We have docks on both the east side and the west side that improve waterfront access for all citizens. But I think you'll see a lot more of that development taking place along the riverfront. Now it'll start to switch over to the west side, because Rifkin scrap metal will have moved off the riverfront between the Johnson Street Bridge and the YMCA. They will have moved to a different area, so I think you will see a lot more commercial development along the riverfront. Hopefully we will see condos somewhere in that riverfront. We know there are a couple of developers who are anxiously looking to build condos in a couple of different areas, one on the east side, one on the west side. So I think there will be a different footprint for the riverfront area. The job market will be different, because in the past we have been primarily manufacturing in the automotive industry. I don't think manufacturing ever goes away, but I think the focus will have changed somewhat. And Saginaw, through some very good negotiations over its water supply, will have enabled surrounding areas to benefit, but Saginaw also, by virtue of selling the water and working some, now they're called 425s, 15 years from now, who knows what they'll be called, but it's under economic development. We've been able to get some taxes back from those properties outside the city proper on projects that have been made possible only because we sold in the water. One I can think of is the Hemlock Semiconductor expansion, which they're pouring $1 billion in. Hopefully a lot of those good paying jobs will have new people moving back into the area and purchasing homes within the city of Saginaw, and revitalizing some of our neighborhoods with new families, young children moving in. So we'll see an increase in the commercial area, we'll see larger yards and a different residential footprint, certainly a different riverfront 15 years from now. You know, there are so many things that I am proud of, but they weren't accomplished just by Carol Cottrell, but by a group of people. One is that public safety millage with regard to, that was the first step this community took to reinvesting in itself. It was that initial pebble in the water that started the ripple effect to getting people to start saying, we have an enlightened self-interest to put money back into our community. I believe we established more credibility with council. We eliminated, with the council that I served as mayor, we eliminated a lot of the bickering at the table. It doesn't mean we all agreed on everything, but we certainly brought a very professional, respectful attitude towards each other. And I know with my successor that she's continuing that legacy as well. The other thing that I'm particularly proud of is in 1997, I approached the then mayor and said, you know, when I ran for council in 95, and again in 97, I heard a lot of candidates speaking about this. In 95, every candidate said the greatest area for economic development is along the riverfront, and yet in our master plan, we don't address riverfront at all. And in having a discussion with that mayor, what came out of it was, well then, would you want to chair a committee? And my response was, I will do the very best I can. And for 2 years, an ad hoc committee that I was privileged to chair worked on creating a riverfront master plan. And in the year 2000, council adopted that plan and established a riverfront development commission. And I really believe that if we had not done that, we would not see near the development that we see along the riverfront corridor. Now, Carol Cottrell didn't make those things happen. It was a number of people, whether it was Saginaw Future, working on the economic development packages to provide incentives and sell the area, or it was the private developers like the Shaheens and SSP that worked in bringing their vision to that area. All we did in establishing that riverfront commission and getting that plan adopted was to give the riverfront a seat at the table and to focus some attention on that area. It was other people that did the work, but I'm particularly proud of that because that has a long-lasting impact, not just with regard to changing the face, but in terms of economics and accessibility for the citizens to the riverfront. Hopefully it'll start to change the imprint of downtown, the West Side Business District. Look out, because we're expanding into the park areas next, and so good things are going to continue to happen, but hopefully those are some of the things that will be my legacy. The beginning of people believing in themselves and in this community and being willing to invest, even though we have such a great concentration of poverty in our community. People, even with that facing them, were willing to reinvest in their community and say, we've got to stop this now. We're seeing a greater increase in the number of people participating in neighborhood watch groups, getting to know their neighbors, getting involved in their neighborhoods, caring about each other. So it's not anything I did by myself or any individual council member did by themselves, but I think it's that climate that we created that allowed all those things to happen. So if that's a legacy, I can live with that.